right, let's talk more about the new proposed Flagstaff Hospital, maybe coming to the Flagstaff area. I do have from Flagstaff Community First, Mike Martinell, who is actually also a former Northern Arizona Healthcare Board member. Mike, how you doing today?
Good, Jeff. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. This is a big one. As you pulled up here to the studio, you may have seen it. Some of my neighbors have signs out there. I think you probably drove by. Yes on 480 and a no on 480 within like just 2 or 3 houses.
Yes. Hopefully those neighbors get along.
Actually, the neighbor put the sign out there and she comes over to me. She's like, I hope you don't mind my sign. I was like, you can put up whatever you want. I don't even have I'm bringing you in and people who are for this to try to get a bearing. And a lot of my listeners and viewers have been like, I'm not sure how to go on this one, quite frankly. So I guess, Mike, let's start off with, you're with Flagstaff Community First. And Flagstaff Community First actually referred this to the ballot,
right?
Because the council they voted on a rezone, and anytime a council does something, the ultimate, I guess, discretion or whatever of the citizens of the city, they can actually go and say, hey, we don't agree with that decision. We're going to get signatures and put this thing on there, right. And that's what you did.
That's part of what that group did. Maybe to back up just a little bit, Jeff.
Yeah.
This whole proposal went through Planning and Zoning. So the Planning and Zoning Commission actually had a whole raft of hearings from the hospital on this, and eventually they actually voted down. They voted no on moving this ahead. That was their recommendation to the city council, and
that was the P&Z.
Yeah, P&Z.
Okay.
Yeah, Planning and Zoning. And so then the city council started their hearings. And they went through probably 2, 3, 4 different meetings. I don't know if you went to any of those, but some of them ended close to midnight.
I wish I could say that I went to them, but I haven't been to a council meeting since I left the council.
they were interesting. And then the city approved it. And I think there's a group of people that felt passionate enough about this that we needed to do something to put this before the voters. And so having a recent example down in Tempe, relative to the hockey team down there and the stadium that they wanted to put in Tempe.
Yeah.
We kind of tried to follow that same model and gathered enough signatures over the summer to have this referred to the ballot in November. And then, of course, in that interim period of time after the signatures were certified, the hospital came out and then challenged the validity of the wording of that referendum, and we had to go through court twice with two wins on the side of Flagstaff Community First, and now it's on the ballot.
So they tried to get it booted off.
Yeah, they did
off the ballots.
Yeah, they did. Which that surprised a lot of people, honestly, at least from the people that I talked to.
Okay, so they approved this thing. I guess let's step back here real quick. I mean, what's describe kind of you're not on the board anymore, but you were on the board. And it wasn't that long ago, till 2020, 2019, I think you said. I started in September of 2019, and I ended my time on the board in May of this year. So almost 4 years. Very recent. 4 years. So why don't you talk about, and I what's up there right now and what the facility's like, I guess, and because the other side is saying, hey, we need a new big facility. And this is an interesting issue because, first of all, and I tell everyone, it's not just a Flagstaff thing, because this hospital does serve a big area. Mm-hmm. It serves a big chunk of Northern Arizona. Is it the case that it's this hospital where you're going down to Phoenix kind of thing for certain trauma and things like that? It kind of depends upon what part of Northern Arizona people are living in. Okay. In some situations, there's arguments about what is the real service area, but if you just for a minute say it's Northern Arizona, some places Las Vegas is closer, some places Albuquerque would be actually closer. When you look at a map of the hospital systems in Northern Arizona, there are about 12 hospitals in Northern Arizona. So FMC is not the only facility up in Northern Arizona serving that entire population. Now, I will say that especially from the northeast part of the state, they do get a fairly large, significant patient pull from that area. Okay. But it's not the only hospital that's in Northern Arizona. Okay. In the publicity and all that, and people who have talked for this rezone, and I guess we should even step back a little further. This current hospital is north of downtown.
Correct.
Sits up on the hill, basically. It's been there for a long time. They've added different branches or different sections over the years.
Right.
I remember when that Sky Bridge wasn't there.
I remember that too.
Yeah.
I remember that.
So it's definitely changed over time. Their claim is that they just, while there's quite a bit of land up there, they don't have the land. It's, through downtown, and they can't add on anymore. Like it can't they have to knock the existing buildings down to, I guess, build something taller. Your experience on that, I mean, is that seem like it's the case? Or?
Jeff, I walked away from this going, if your intent is to build a brand new hospital, mm-hmm. then yeah, you probably have some of the issues that the hospital is talking about, if that's what your intent is. But like most hospitals that do in-place refurbishments, they're not tearing down old suites and then adding new suites.
Okay.
I think hospitals today, if they've got to expand services, they figure out a way to do it on site without having to tear down facilities and have that kind of disruption that FMC has been, or NIH has been talking about. And so if there's a problem, for example, and we've heard this a lot about the ER and the ER wait times, then leadership should deal with the emergency room and what do we need to do to fix the issues that are going on there. Some of the answers may be related to building a new facility, but I would say probably more than likely it's staff issues and personnel issues that have to be addressed before we deal with having to add or take away from facilities. So if NIH is approaching this in a way that says, we want that picture that we keep seeing that's going to be out at Fort Tuthill, we want one of those at the top of Hospital Hill, then yeah, they're going to have problems. But if they try and look at the areas that they're having problems in, that they're trying to address, I think there's solutions that they just haven't explored, and they don't want to explore.
One of the things, okay, the place where they're proposing to build this is just south of Flagstaff, kind of near the Fort Tuthill area.
Right.
I believe it's just shy of 200 total acres, although the rezone request was for a portion of that, 80 acres or something like that,
yeah.
Off the top of my head. And they wanted to rezone that because I think it was zoned for rural residential, like single family houses with a little bit more land.
Right.
So you're kind of going from more of a rural residential setting to, I think it's called community commercial, if memory serves me right, which allows commercial use, mixed use, I would imagine, denser use. So what they went to the council for was the rezone. And what's interesting is, because we talk about private property rights all the time on the show, but everybody's property has a zoning in there. Sometimes there's two, sometimes there's some stacked on top of each other, believe it or not. And when in Arizona, you can't impose a zoning restriction or whatever on an existing property owner that wasn't there. There's actually been a constitutional amendment. However, in a case where you're going for a rezone, that's where it opens it up, and that's when the council, like you said, P&Z, and then council ultimately has the authority. And then I guess ultimately the people of Flagstaff has the authority. In this case, the council can change the zoning and vote on it. In this case, they voted, I think, 6-0. There must have been one member missing.
Councilman Aslan was not there for the last
and vote. He's been a pretty staunch, I believe, opponent.
Yes. In fact, there's a video out that if those folks who were undecided should take a look at it, because he brings up some really great points about the whole concept of the village that NIH wants to build.
And that's what they're calling this. They're calling it Northern Arizona Healthcare. NIH is calling this a health and wellness village.
Correct.
And the part that went to the rezone for the council that they approved was like for the 80 acres, and it's for what they're calling phase 1, which is what I was told, and let me know if you've heard different, the actual hospital core, I guess the building and the medical facilities. Is that
correct?
Okay. And,
so it's the hospital and what they call their medical office buildings.
Okay.
So kind of an outpatient service building where you would have doctor offices, things like that. So that's what NIH has characterized as phase 1. But from the very beginning, this has always been the intent of being a healthcare village. That's what NIH has tried to put forward. So hospital and the medical office building would be first, followed by this very large retail housing development that the hospital would be putting forward into that area.
Yeah. And this was phase 2 was commercial. It could be office, strip mall. It could be apartments. It could be anything really. And I talked to them about that, and I think you listened to that interview as well. And they were saying, well, we're going to have somebody else do all that. But I think that the question I had for them was, are you taking your eye off the ball? You're a medical facility, and then you're all of a sudden getting into kind of the property development side of this. And they were like, well, we're going to have somebody else do that. And, that's way down the road. But you have, and your group has concerns about what is that phase 2, I think, right?
Well, the NIH has already said that they've submitted the paperwork to the city to get that phase 2 portion of the land rezoned appropriately. And so, they've characterized to the community that they would partner. They said they would partner with somebody and let somebody else figure out what the development is. But NIH is going to have a very strong say as to what goes into that facility. And they're going to participate from a financial perspective on the downside revenues that are going to come from either the sale or lease of that land. And so, kind of by default, they're going to start to get into land development. And honestly, one of the areas that I think I had as a board member is, we're a hospital. Okay, we're not land developers. We should be worried about the hospital and making sure that we're delivering the right kind of care to folks. And branching off into something else was way beyond the expertise of anybody within the system.
Here's the and I've had this discussion with regular guest hosts here on my show. Had this discussion with my wife Angela as well. I've had multiple people that usually think kind of along the same lines as philosophies and property rights and this and that, all coming out on different ends of this as far as yes or no. But one thing that I keep going back to is, how is any of their operation side, because that's what's kind of come into the light, I guess, with this rezoning question. Why does that matter to the voters of Flagstaff? I guess, why is that? Because now it's about their operations. And I asked the pro people, the hospital people about this too. How should or why should the people of Flagstaff, I guess, be deciding, hey, we want to do this rezone or don't want to do this rezone, but we have questions about the hospital operations, I guess is what I'm getting at.
NIH, I think, has mischaracterized in a lot of ways the reasons behind why they want this, why they think they need this new hospital. And when you look at some of those reasons, they talk about, we're turning away 4,000 to 5,000 people a year.
Okay.
People are having to go to Phoenix or Las Vegas or New Mexico for care, or the facilities are too old and we can't build on those facilities. Every one of the answers that I've heard from NIH related to that, there's a bit of a spin, or there's part of the story that's not being told to folks. Okay, a great example.
Give me one of those.
A great example is we're full. In fact, there was an article in the Daily Sun by Dave Cheney, who's the new CEO, and he said, we've been turning away 4,000 to 5,000 people. People are having to drive to these different areas because we're full. I'm paraphrasing what the article said. Well, that's just not true. When you look at the numbers that they have to, what NIH has to report to the Arizona Department of Health Services, their occupancy rates, and these are measured on an annual basis. These are required reporting by hospitals, have ranged for the last 3 years between 53 and 68%. So they're not filling the beds, all right? And it's only been recently, probably within the last week, that we started to hear, well, they're trying to manage the ratios being nurses to patients, okay?
Okay.
Which, and that makes sense if you want to try and run a quality hospital, but then why is it that you need a hospital? Because it's the reasons about people are having to leave because we don't have space is not going to get fixed by a new hospital. If you have the same philosophy and same shortages, having a new hospital is not going to fix that problem.
Let's hit on that a little more. I got to take a quick break, and any comments, I'd love to hear from you. Talk with Jeff at iCloud.com. All right, we're talking with Mike Martinell, who's with Flagstaff Community First. He's also a former Northern Arizona Healthcare board member. Flagstaff Community First is opposing, it's called, what is it, Prop 480?
Prop 480.
Prop 480. I know this is a very Flagstaff specific issue, as far as for the voters, because you're the only ones that people who live in the city limits of Flagstaff are the only ones that are going to get to vote on this, but it does impact a lot of people in the area, and communities throughout Northern Arizona. But you brought up something, Mike, before we went to break that I thought was interesting, because the thing that I have heard is we've got shortages. I hear this from everybody, shortages of labor.
Absolutely.
You hear it no matter what business, what industry you're in, but I particularly hear we've got shortage of nurses. I read an article recently that Arizona is expecting like 2,000, top of my head, 2,000, being short 2,000 when it comes to doctors by like 2030. So one of the questions I've had about this whole process and just the whole expansion of the hospital is, if we're having trouble now, and I'll get your take on this, what does that look like with a much larger facility going forward, unless the labor problems just resolve themselves over the next couple of years, because that's how long this is going to take.
Exactly. And I think that's the point of many of the members of the Flagstaff Community First group, is that if we're not full now, then don't characterize to the community. Don't tell the community that you're turning people away, because that's not the case. You might be turning people away because you're not staffing appropriately, or the relationships that you have with your operational folks is not where it's supposed to be. The frontline workers are underpaid, overworked. They can't buy a house in Flagstaff. All the things that we keep hearing in lots of parallel industries about Flagstaff. Certainly, I think the healthcare workers are at the forefront of having to deal with those kinds of things. So those are the things that I think, that's how all this operational activity comes into the discussion, is that it's more than just a zoning issue. It's an issue around characterization and telling the truth to the people of Flagstaff, and it folds into, well, then what's really the problem? How do we fix the problem? Putting another facility, a brand new facility, not sure exactly how much bigger it's really going to be when you get down to the number of rooms that they're going to have. How is that going to really help the issue of people having to go to Phoenix or Las Vegas?
One of the things, Mike, that the people in support of the rezone, Prop 480, they're saying, hey, well, we don't have the space. Like a lot of hospitals, the standard now is 2,000 square feet per patient or something like that. And NAH, or the current facility in Flagstaff at least, is like 1,000. Mm-hmm. So they're like, well, it's not just about, because beds have come up. Oh, we need to add more beds, and this doesn't add as many beds as we were led to believe. Right. But they're saying, well, we need a certain amount of space. The industry standards nowadays is much different. You can't even have like the divided rooms. There's two per room in some cases. That's what they were telling me. And like new standards, when you build a new hospital, they're saying they don't even allow that at this point. It has to be single occupancy.
Yeah, Jeff, let me back up a little bit, because this is the part of characterization that I think NAH is doing a disservice to the community. In their own application to the city for this whole project, there's a big write-up about what is NAH, and they go through much of the detail of what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. One of the things they characterize is that they've got like 29 rooms in the hospital that are designated for double occupancy. Well, that's 58 beds. Okay. And 58 beds, only about 25% of their bed capacity is related to double beds. And if they wanted to do that, if they really cared, if that was really the number one issue that they wanted to deal with, they could make those single room beds now. All right. There's a very small percentage.
Because you're saying they're not even filling the
they're
capacity.
They're not even filling the hospital. If they wanted to make those single room beds, they could do that and not affect their capacity or ability to bring patients in. There's other things that I think that people are concerned about. I think something that at least I've realized, double checking some of the figures and numbers, their population growth figures that they put out for Flagstaff and Coconino County and the whole part of northern Arizona seems to be way optimistic than what some of the other economic studies are coming out. There was a study that was put out by Ecana. I don't know if you are familiar with that.
Yeah.
Economic Collaboration of Northern Arizona. They just put out a economic study for Northern Arizona last month. And between 2010 in 2012, Coconino County, not just Flagstaff, but Coconino County has grown less than 1% per year.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And when and so they've got their projections that go out to 2030, as does, whatever numbers NAH came up with in the presentations that they gave to the city. When you get out to 2030, NAH's population numbers for just Coconino County are 70,000 higher than what this latest economic report says. When you get out to 2040, it's over 120,000 higher than what this latest economic report says. So when you continue to inflate the population that's going to be in northern Arizona, you can easily paint a picture to people that we're going to be we're overcrowded and we're not going to be able to support that. But if they were to use something that's more realistic in their future projections, I'd love to see what that would tell you about the capacity
where we're
of the
going to be
hospital.
at. Okay. Let's do this because I want to hit on, I think something that's, from my times remembering back to being on council, when you're looking at zoning issues, some of the core issues that they always told me to look at was the infrastructure. Is there taxpayer costs involved and stuff like this? Because we're talking a lot about the business model and all that. And I think that's where this gets, it's an interesting topic. I mean, just going to the voters with this because we're kind of blurring zoning and the business operations.
Right.
So let's switch to the kind of the zoning and the infrastructure and all that when we come back. And if you got comments, love to hear from you. Talk with Jeff at iCloud.com. All right, welcome back. We're talking with Mike Martinell. He's with Flagstaff Community First, talking about the proposed hospital for Flagstaff voters. You're talking about Prop 480, but for really so many people around the region, you're talking about a hospital that many of you have used over the years. And they're proposing building a big new place just south of Flagstaff right now I think we're at like 80 acres, but really it's like a 200-acre area by Fort Tuthill, rezoning it from residential to commercial. And that area there's a road that goes by, what is that, 89? It's 89.
89,
heads towards Sedona.
Right.
That road from let's say the Walmart to where Fort Tuthill is, where you have, 90 roundabouts that get you dizzy. Single lane each way,
right?
No shoulder,
right?
We drive it from time to time, especially when we go out to the fair, and we're like, oh man, this is a train wreck right now. I would assume, and you know what they say about assuming, that there's going to have to be some kind of road changes there. Is that part of the deal? Go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah. So part of what NAH had to sign off on was any road improvements that would be needed. It would be on their dime. At the beginning of the summer, NAH had applied for a grant from the federal government that I think it's some kind of a matching grant where they were going to get the funds to be able to actually widen that road. So it had been estimated that widening that road, and I think this is in the public records, was something to the tune of $45 million, $50 million.
No, I believe it. Yeah.
Well, they didn't get the grant.
Oh.
So now that goes to the NAH ledger side. And they're trying to stick really close to the budget that they've been talking about for $865 million. Well, the fact that we didn't get that grant just added $45 million to that budget. So where does that go? Does that mean now that we're well over $900 million plus inflation? Or is there something about the project that's going to get cut? See, nobody's talking about those kinds of details. And so do we wind up with something actually less than what everybody's expecting if this actually happens to
Is
pass?
it defined in the rezone that went through council as far as it has to be, 4 lanes? And
I think
all that should be laid
there
out.
There was a traffic study that was done. Unfortunately, it wasn't done during heavy peak times like what goes on at the fair. I understand that traffic this year at the going in and out of the fair was pretty horrendous for people.
It's a busy road in general, though. Yeah. I mean, people going to Sedona,
backing up
tourists.
So it was tough. But it's there was a traffic study and 2 lanes on each way, as I understand. There's also been some debate about an underpass under I-17 that basically dumps off into the area over by the airport, Ponderosa Trails area. So I think there's some debate about the timing of when that should be, but that's another thing that's going to be on the ledger side.
To me, on a zoning request and any kind of big development side, that's an important question: is where's the traffic going to go and all that. It sounds like it was addressed, but it does sound like there are questions about how much does it cost and all that.
The one area that probably comes up more than anything is, yeah, so this traffic study was done, but it wasn't done at peak times when there are events going on at Fort Tuthill. So what's that really going to mean to now that you have, thousands of cars going out there once they get a full development built with this health village? And
then at certain times, I'm traveling 17 a lot. You look at I-17, for example, on a Sunday afternoon.
Yes.
It is stacked up.
Yeah,
people rushing back down to Phoenix, I would presume. So timing is a big thing. Something else that came up, Mike, that I was kind of surprised about, and I haven't read the development agreement or anything like that. Flagstaff, and I can tell you this because when I was on the council, it was a very sensitive issue on building height.
Right.
And man, we got into battles over, I believe they were 6 or 7 story student housing projects, like in downtown Flagstaff. And it was heated. And I was a little surprised to learn when I interviewed the hospital folks on this issue that there was a waiver put in for 160 feet. Does that sound?
It's about right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about right.
Because so I was like, okay, that's 16 stories because I'm figuring, okay, 10 feet per story. And they were like, okay, no, it's really 7 stories because I guess it's hospital stories is what I learned. I don't know any of this stuff.
They're running oxygen lines.
Yeah, it's taller. But in general terms of what people understand now, it's approximately a 16-story building, and you're coming in off of I-17 and you're coming into Flag. That would be quite, what's Purina? Purina's one of the taller buildings in Flag. And then I think the NAU dorms there built in like the 60s or 70s or something. I think those are like 10 or something stories. So this is significantly taller than anything, I guess, that's currently in the city of Flagstaff.
Right.
Is that an issue for Flagstaff Community First, for people you've been talking to? Because I haven't really actually heard much of that mentioned too much.
There's all sorts, I think, of aesthetic and environmental issues that folks have with the proposed new building. Obviously, the height is one of those restrictions. The ability to enjoy the view of the peaks is going to be in some way, shape, or form, inhibited by some of the folks that live around that area. There's environmental sustainability questions. NAH has said that they need to have, or they're going to build the facility with certain kinds of standards relative to sustainability and carbon footprint. But it's not at the highest standards, and some of the people are saying not at the highest standards of what other systems are building their hospitals to. And this all becomes a conflict because within the city of Flagstaff has made these proclamations relative to trying to be environmentally friendly and carbon neutral by 2030 or 2035. So there's something that's actually been passed as a goal for the city of Flagstaff, and the hospital's not getting there. There's not going to be a contribution. In fact, when you look at whatever becomes of, if they were to build it, whatever becomes of the old hospital area, plus the emissions from the new hospital, actual emission loads in northern Arizona will go up because you now have 2 gigantic facilities that are emitting things. Even though the new hospital would be less, it's still not carbon neutral.
Is the counter to that area is going to get developed with a bunch of single family houses at some point anyway?
Maybe not. Yeah.
What's the hospital? And I asked this question. What do you think happens to the current facility? Because obviously, I can't remember the acreage. It was sizable, not as big as this one. In north of downtown Flag. That's a chunk of change sitting there. So I would imagine it gets sold off, redeveloped or something. What happens to that?
So, NAH has come back and said that they would partner with, the city and the county to, develop or I guess to hold hearings and find out what people want to do with this particular area. Mm-hmm. Would it be housing? Would it be senior living places? Would it be educational areas? I think those are things to be determined in the future. I think where people have the biggest angst about that is we're walking into this not knowing what's going to happen, what that commitment's really going to be. And that's where people don't feel comfortable with moving ahead. Some people don't feel comfortable moving ahead if they don't know what's going to happen with the old facility. And there's no commitment from NAH to tell us what's going to happen.
Yeah, and it's obviously it has to be redeveloped.
Yeah,
I would imagine an existing hospital is not I don't know if it's easily retrofittable a word. I mean, you're going to retrofit something like that. I imagine that it gets the wrecking ball.
I'm guessing that there could be some industries that you could move in there and probably do it without a lot of refurbishment. But yeah, I'm guessing you're probably right.
Here's what I want to do, Mike. I got to take a quick break. We're kind of tight on time. I want you to share some upcoming events, things like that, some final thoughts, because what I'm going to do is I want to carry you over a little bit longer into our podcast so everyone can go to talkwithjeff.com, after our break here in a few minutes and listen some more and hear some more information on this. And any comments you got, love to hear from you. talkwithjeff@icloud.com. All right, Mike Martinell is with us, Flagstaff Community First member. He's a former NAH board member, talking about the hospital. We're just about out of time here for everybody out there in FM land, but I am going to carry it over into the podcast with some more questions for Mike, and I think that you all want to hear this because it's a pretty big issue, especially for Northern Arizona and especially for Flagstaff folks. But you got a lot of info at flagstaffcommunityfirst.org. Is this a newer group? This group
came as a result.
Is this the hospital? Yep. Is this as a result of that?
This is as a result specifically of the council passing this ordinance.
Okay. There are some upcoming kind of Q&A or public meetings.
Yeah, there's a couple of public meetings next week. One of them is going to be virtual. One of them I think is going to be in person. I think the one in person is going to be the library, I believe, next Tuesday.
Okay.
Just real quick look. I think it's next Tuesday.
What I can do is you get me that and I'll put it in the podcast and the show notes for everybody.
I'll do that.
And then flagstaffcommunityfirst.org has info, flagstaffcommunityfirst.org. But Mike, this is coming up pretty quick. Ballots go out here
next week.
Is it next week? Okay. So second week of October. And then we have, with our mail-in ballot system, you got 4 or 5 weeks before they do that first Tuesday of November. Yeah. It's an all mail-in ballot.
Right.
What's interesting about this, and let me get your take on this before we check out here for the hour. Were you upset that it was number 20?
Actually, no.
Did you know?
I wasn't.
No, okay.
I would have wanted it either in the beginning or at the end.
At the end, okay.
But not buried in the middle.
Okay. I mean, because it's, you're voting yes or no on the rezone. It's pretty simple, but the ballot is not simple because I've never seen, and we're going to try to discuss this next week or two. I have never seen so many things on a mail-in ballot that has to do with city charter stuff.
Yes.
I don't know who came up with that, but I would never put that much.
A lot of wording changes.
Oh, man. That's a whole nother
propositions.
That's a whole nother couple hours of programming there, folks.
The other thing, Jeff, just to remind folks, it's only City of Flagstaff residents that can vote on this, even though there's lots of outlying communities and people.
Oh, I hear you in Donny Park and Kachina, and everybody always gets frustrated because they don't have a say, but they have their businesses in town or they work in town or whatever. So
City of Flagstaff residents only.
Yeah. Okay. So those are coming out. Keep an eye on your mailbox for that. Final thoughts though on this whole thing here.
This is a big deal. This is probably one of the biggest projects that the City of Flagstaff has had, at least in the 30 years that I've been around here, and it matters. You're talking about a gigantic investment for the region, and so I think people really need to take a look at something around. Is this something that is needed, or is the information that we're being told correct? Is it really there for the population and the growth of the population, or are there other ulterior motives that are kind of overriding and are lurk in the shadows? And it's a big deal. And I encourage everybody, if you're registered to vote and you get that ballot, please turn it in because it really does matter. Okay. The last thing I want to say is no matter what happens in November, make sure that everybody supports our healthcare givers in this town. They're shorthanded, they're overworked.
Yeah.
And they need our support no matter what happens here.
Absolutely. All right, Mike, stick around. We're going to take off now, but we're going to continue a few more questions for you on the podcast. Sure. So everybody can go to talkwithjeff.com. Look up the Jeff Oravits Show on your favorite podcast provider on your smartphones, wherever. Video on Rumble, video on YouTube as well. Just look up Oravits, Oravits. And as always want your comments. Talkwithjeff@icloud.com. All right, Mike Martinell's still here with us, Flagstaff Community First, and we're talking about the hospital, flagstaffcommunityfirst.org, a lot of info there, and I think some upcoming events as well. A question came up from a listener about previous plans to, apparently there's maybe a pot of money that was available for just remodeling the current hospital.
Right.
Have you heard of that? And is that off the table, or is that money pushed to the side of the building side, I guess?
Actually, some of the items in that plan, so that's what people are referring to as the New Era Strategic Plan. Mm-hmm. That was a plan that was developed, I would say, probably a year before I joined the board. In fact, Jeff, is one of the first documents that I received as a board member to say, hey, this is the charter that we've got. This is kind of the strategic plan that the hospital has going forward. And there have already been things off of that plan that have been completed. And one of the things that surprises me, again, it's a world of dichotomies. The hospital says they cannot make any changes to the facilities that they've got. It's too old. It's too whatever.
Too complicated.
It's too whatever. But it's interesting. There was a line item in that plan, and again, I'm not speaking confidentially about anything. This is information that's all in the public domain now. But they have completed and opened last year what they commonly refer to as the hybrid operating room. So it's a brand new state-of-the-art operating room that was part of that plan that we're referring to, that they actually completed on site. So they did exactly what they said they can't do. Mm. They also had line items for the Verde Valley Medical Center and the medical office building down there of refurbishing that. And that's something that got completed probably within the last 2 or 3 years. But last year they completed this new OR, and it has really brought a new level of technology and expertise to Flagstaff. People who have problems with heart valves no longer need to go to Phoenix.
Okay.
They can have them done up here. So that is something that is a feather in the cap of the leaders of NAH to actually build that. But they've also proven that they can build in place and improve in place and improve the quality and service level to the people of Flagstaff without spending over $900 million.
The advertisements, I've heard, I believe radio ads, I've gotten quite a few mailers. I think I have a stack behind me, actually. I start saving all this stuff during political season. It's kind of sick, actually, when you start collecting that kind of stuff. But anyway, I brought this up to the hospital folks, and I said, it's pretty negative painting ads that I've heard, where it's, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this now. And maternity side of things, there's some very, heartbreaking types of commercials that are running. And I asked them this, I said, hey, it kind of paints a picture of you're not there, you don't have the service and can't provide the service now. And I said, well, what happens if this fails? Aren't you worried that you've kind of run a campaign that now points it in a negative light, and people are like, should I go to Flagstaff or should I drive to Phoenix? That's kind of how I felt when I haven't quite ever seen an ads run like this, where kind of almost painting operations in a negative light. Mm-hmm. Or maybe not operations is fair, but the facility.
Right.
And you're like, well, what if this does fail? Where are we at? Have you gotten that kind of feeling from some of the stuff that's out there, or is it just me? It's possible.
No. I've heard that same comment from others about the fact that it appears from the advertisement that care is not that great at Flagstaff Medical Center, and so they actually need this new facility to help upgrade the care that's given to patients. One thing I think all the listeners need to understand is that Flagstaff Medical Center has one of the highest quality ratings in the state, as does Verde Valley Medical Center. And so, in spite of all the things that they're trying to portray to the group, what I characterize as being disingenuous with the people in Flagstaff, they've earned, and they deserve to celebrate this, that they have one of the highest quality grades
in the state. And that's what they told me too, remembering back to my interview. And I'm not trying to paint it that way. It was just kind of the feeling and maybe that's more of politics of running a campaign, right? And that's the fit when I heard it, and I've been around a lot of campaigns over the years. I'm like, oh, this is the picture that's being painted, but they were awarded and are very highly rated. I will say personally, I have been there we've had 2 of our 3 kids there. Great. Everything went great. I've had to visit the emergency room a few times with those same kids that have done dumb things,
right?
But I've also done dumb things, and I've had to go to Verde Valley there, stepping on a rusty nail, this and that. And I've always had as great of an experience as you can have in a hospital, right?
Right.
I mean, you're there under some pretty rough circumstances usually. So that's not been my experience, but I did worry about it being kind of painted that way. And then people are like, what's going on?
On one hand, they want everybody to think that this is just a zoning question. But on the other side, they're playing to the emotions of the voters by putting forward things like that. As I understand, I haven't seen the ad, but they've got a picture of an overcrowded emergency room. And they talked about, how bad that is. Well, that's not even the emergency room in Flagstaff Medical
Okay,
Center.
that is the ad you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'll try to impose it here for you.
So it's not even, that's not.
It comes to politics. Everybody, and I've seen
politics and emotions.
I get that. A listener asked me this question: what happens? And I failed to ask this of NAH when they were on. That's just the nature of this game. Sorry. So you get the question, and I don't know if you know the answer. What happens? What happens if this fails? Just business as usual in the current hospital, or is there plans? Have you heard of plans? Do it somewhere else? So as far as building.
So I don't know if you attended that NAH
No, I don't
conference.
I don't get out much.
It wasn't a conference. It was an in-person meeting at the Murdoch Center to try and answer questions. And I think, I didn't go to it either, but what was related to me is that Dave Cheney has said, I think, at that meeting, and maybe
Who's that?
He's their CEO.
Okay,
the new CEO.
Yeah, okay,
has said that if this fails, that he's devoted. He's gonna get and find better facilities for Flagstaff. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that, let's dust off the plans that we had developed 5 years ago, or if they're going to look for something someplace else. I don't know what that necessarily means, but it seems like we have his commitment to upgrade the facilities. And I don't think anybody in Flagstaff Community First is saying that we don't need upgraded facilities. No one's saying that. And no one's sitting there saying, no one's against, better health care for Northern Arizona. But $900 million, and you're giving us these X number of reasons, yet the data is telling us something very different. We all want something, but let's deal with it in a way that is more strategic and targeted versus this, we need this big, gigantic thing that sits out at Fort Tuthill.
All right, Mike. Final thoughts again. Second final thoughts here,
Sure.
Since we went in a little extra time with the podcast. Anything you want to get out there for folks? I'll remind everybody, Flagstaff Community First.org is the place to go for more information. But final thoughts if we missed anything.
Sure. There's lots of information, as you guys might imagine, on social media, Facebook. The Nextdoor app has a lot of information. I've even seen some of these posts that are out on Reddit. You can get some information out there from folks. I know Flagstaff First has been, they've tried really hard to not make just broad statements that don't have any backing. And so we've tried to find the data that backs up the stories that we've been telling about it. And it seems like almost every point that NAH talks about, there's a question about what they're saying and what they're doing and why they're doing it. And at the end of the day, I think everybody's in favor of better health care in Northern Arizona. What we want leadership up at the hospital to do and their board to do is look at this in a more strategic way. Look at this in a manner that looks at the facilities that you've got, and let's be targeted at where we think we're having problems, and let's deal with some of those problems. If some of those problems are operational in nature, then deal with it. Take care of it so that the city of Flagstaff is not looking at this gigantic development, and we really don't have a lot to say about what goes on in there.
All right, Mike, I appreciate all the information. Again, FlagstaffCommunityFirst.org. Look for your ballots coming out here second week of October and get those in. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching this video. Thank you to everyone listening on the podcast as well. Do me a favor right now. Please subscribe I appreciate everybody that's doing it. Subscribe, and share with your friends. If you've already done that, leave a comment. That helps us out a lot, and we'll see you back here real soon.